Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the Farm Chatter podcast, another episode of Auction Chatter here on Farm Chatter, where I'll be joined once again by Moshe Maimon, as I always am on these Auction Chatter podcasts. And this episode will be discussing the new Genazym catalog of the Giants. It's auction 21. This auction will take place Sunday, September 7th, which is Yud Daled Elul, and this will be at 1 p.m. Eastern Time and 8 p.m. in Yerushalayim, which is where they broadcast live from. They do it live from Yerushalayim. And so we'll be discussing Genazym once again. This episode is sponsored by Genazym. Thank you to them for sponsoring. And as always, there'll be a link and information in the show notes you can check out. You can check out the catalog on Genazym's website, and you should definitely go and check out. And as with always, we do these auction chatters, we always say, go check out the items. But with Genazym especially, and I think we say this every time with Genazym, right? We say always, go check out the item, because the catalog is so beautiful to see these different items. And as they call it here, catalog of the Giants, you can see that there are some really beautiful items, many manuscripts. And in fact, as we're going to get to in a minute, very often auctions start off with Sfarim and old editions, and then eventually they get into some manuscripts or some letters. Here you have massive, heavy hitter manuscripts, if you will, right at the beginning that we're going to get into. So it's really nice to see. So first of all, Ramesha, thank you for joining me once again.
Oh, so nice to be here, Nachi. Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity. It's like a traveling museum. These catalogs, everybody should look through the catalog either online or actually if you can pick up a copy of the print catalog. It's well worth your while to look through it. Like you mentioned, this is the catalog of the Giants, which is very aptly titled catalog because the selections here are just, like you said, top of the line, the heavy hitting. These are the Gedolei Yisrael from the past 400 years, and you get to see them in an intimate, up-close, personal way, which you're not often afforded just reading a little biographical snippet here and there. So it's very rich and beautiful, and with no further ado, Nachi, let's get right into this because this is great.
As always, we're not going to run through every item. We'll run through some. We'll mention the lot. Maybe we'll mention what the starting price is, but there's no way, as we always mention, the caveat of whatever. You can never know what it's going to go for and what it even is at the time we're recording. So, yes, another thing to mention, as you say, is that the print catalog, and it's really a dying breed, the beautiful print catalog where a lot of work goes into it, research. Many auction houses still do a nice job of researching and putting up nice pictures online, but they don't do a print catalog. So first of all, Genazym does a gorgeous print catalog. You can still get a hold of it. I think they ship them out if you're someone that's registered. I don't know exactly how that works, but I think you can buy them. Really a beautiful catalog. It's a 150-page catalog. I mean, just to own the catalog, you can get pictures of the Kisvei others, and you can just keep it. I know people that collect catalogs. And also, they always do a great job with all the really, really top-quality pictures and scans, and you can see more of that online, again, or in the catalog. So let's jump right in it, and as we mentioned, there are manuscripts right away. The first lot is a Pri Megadim, Frankfurt, 1792, the Ksav Yad, the signature of the Pri Megadim, and the Pri Megadim is Yosef Tumim. So it actually is signed. This is a Psak Din, and it's not only... The Psak is not only the Pri Megadim, but the Psak is signed by the Pri Megadim as well. And so you can actually see, they blew it up, that you can see the Chsim of the Pri Megadim. There are a number of others that are signed on here also, but the Pri Megadim is a very famous Paisik, and he has a bunch of others for him as well. He was the Rav in Frankfurt on the Oder in Germany, right? It's interesting also to note that it said Frankfurt, but it's Frankfurt on the Oder. He wasn't in Frankfurt am Main, which is the one that maybe listeners are maybe for sure more familiar with him here. Frankfurt. This is not Frankfurt am Main. He was on Frankfurt on the Oder, the other one, where there's a famous printing press and other things.
The main difference when in writing it in Hebrew, you'll always see the difference is it's Papdam or Papda. Pei Dalet Aleph is Frankfurt on the Oder, and Papdam is Frankfurt on the Main, which is the more, like you said, the more famous Frankfurt. Just a word about the Pri Megadim. Everybody knows the Sefer Pri Megadim, which is an incredible Sefer because it's the most complex, the most relevant topics of Jewish law, Shulchan Aruch and Yoreh De'ah, and it's so cogent and clear. It's somebody with just an absolute perfect grasp of the sources, and also an uncanny ability for making it. Breaking it down to its analytical components. Really a best-selling, runaway bestseller from the minute it hit the print till today. It's indispensable, of course. Anyone who learns Shulchan Aruch knows that. A word about him. This is a theme that jumped out at me of some of these giants. are the way these are giants that weren't trained to be giants. These are giants that were just so great. They were taken from everyday life to be the Rabbanim. There's a few such Rabbanim here. The Pri Megadim was one of them. The Pri Megadim, for the bulk of his life, was privately employed as a tutor in the home of wealthy people in Berlin and in Frankfurt. And it's only later in life, towards the end of his life, where they kind of pressured him to take the position as a rabbi because he was just his unparalleled greatness. As a Melamed, he was very, very broad. First of all, he's dealing with Baal Batim. He's dealing with people that are maybe more, what we'd call more liberal, less in the base medrash, more in the world at large. And he knows how to communicate with them. He knows what's important, what you should emphasize. His introduction to the Pri Megadim is a very classic work on Yedias Klalius, where he talks about how a proper educational curriculum for teaching people, and it includes diktuk, it includes lashon kodesh, and he gives examples of Sfarim you should buy, like the Sfarim of Rabbi Yoav Bachur and others. It's a very very colorful introduction it's been published on its own. To Igaris Koilelis, some call it. So he's a really very well-rounded Amcha kind of person who's just a genius, genius, the greatest of the great, and that's the Pri Megadim.
Yeah, just you mentioned who he was. So one of the houses that he was in, the Daniel Itzig had in Berlin, a kind of like a place, and Itzig is it's the same time in Berlin, so Mendelssohn is there, and there's a little later. The Pri Megadim leaves in 1771, but the Daniel Itzig, his son-in-law, is the notorious David Friedlander, and so for those that are familiar, it starts Chinuch Haram. There's a whole Haskalah parsha here. The Pri Megadim is not a maskil, to be clear, but the Pri Megadim is in this period operating here in Germany at the start. He's even in Berlin. He's a Tzurish Levin is there, right? And this is that whole Tkufa is what's going on over there, and then he's there in Berlin, and he ends up leaving, and he goes back, and he ends up becoming as you said, in the last 10 years of his life in Frankfurt an der Oder, he becomes the Rav there. What's interesting also is that this psak is signed the 15th of Adar, 1792, so it's less than 2 months before he passes away. Also, the English translation, if you've seen the Genazym catalog, they said, it shows you that enough and always how you see with the Svarim, and it says, the words of the young Yosef Tumah, because he's not young, but it's an Anochi Hatzair, because that's how they wrote. Even when someone is old, that's how you sign your name, right? Anochi Hatzair, who's here in Frankfurt an der Oder. So this is again, you can see there's other sign on this as well, but that's the attraction, the main attraction here, if you will, with this psak. This theme is continued in the second lot here, in lot 2, which is this Tu'udat Chaver Smicha with a signature of the Noda B'Yehuda Becheskel Landau in Ubeis Dina in Prague in 1757. Now, there are number of other Rabbanim here, including a mayor official of Bumzla, Talmud Rebbeinu Shneibish, I believe, and Rabbi Dr. David Katz on his podcast, I think, did a whole podcast episode about him just now, I believe.
Isn't he the Rebbe of Rabbi Lezer Fleckles and Rabbi Lezer Fleckles' father? He's like a very famous Melamed in Prague as well, I think. Yeah, and there's a number of other ones here as well, and oftentimes, because you hear of the Noda B'Yehuda, and then the next generation of Lezer Fleckles, the Chumayava, and Rosh Landau, we sometimes forget of all these other Rabbanim. Maybe people are Vitzal Ransberg, maybe they heard of some of the others, Rabbi Fishelis, maybe they hear of some others, but there are so many Gedolei Olam in Prague. So first of all, obviously, again, the main attraction, you have the signature of Noda B'Yehuda on this, but you also have these other Gedolei Olam signed on this over here, on this lot 2 in Genazym auction. Now, continuing on, again, it just starts with these manuscripts. You have an autograph manuscript. There's an autograph of Tzvi Hirsch of Lesla, but you also there's a handwritten, the Nesivis, handwritten Haskama here on lot 2. So right away you get, again, it's these combination of these big Gedolei Olam. Then you have there's a long tshuva of Ephraim Zal Margolis of Brod, and that's lot 4. But lot 5 is one that right away jumped out at me. Right when I saw this catalog, it was lot 5, which is the base mayor's personal copy with hundreds of hagoyos and corrections on Sefer Beis Meir and Even Ezer. So Even Ezer is the one that he printed in, by the way, Frankfurt an der Oder, 1787. We just mentioned Frankfurt an der Oder, so here we go. Again, Frankfurt an der Oder, as I mentioned, there was a press there. So Meir Posner printed Beis Meir, a very famous Sefer. And by the way, this is being redone by Mechon Yerushalayim as we speak. They're redoing the Beis Meir, so hopefully these corrections will get included in that new edition, because these are really amazing. You see, he wrote it on the margin. And this is something common that happened in many Sfarim, where you had Mechabrim make corrections. I know there was a few auctions ago, Genazym had, remember we talked about Zalman Henna, he had like his own Sefer with like blank pages where he would add those corrections.
here, and a lot of other Svarim, they didn't have that. They didn't print a special copy for the Mechaber with like a blank page for him to make corrections, but the Mechaber had a copy, and he wrote his own corrections and revisions, and sometimes he had a Madura Basra, and sometimes not, and you can actually see them in the handwriting of the Beis Meir, and as they note here in the catalog, he literally, many of these Hagoyes begin with, I corrected this, I changed this, and you can actually see him working through the process of revising the Sefer.
The Beis Meir himself, and they bring this down in the catalog, the Beis Meir himself and other Svarim refers to these corrections as if it's its own chibur, like in other volumes of Beis Meir, not the one in Ibn Ezer, which was printed in his lifetime, but other volumes, he refers to the additions that he had written in the margin, and this is another reason for those very large margins we sometimes see in these old Svarim, is because a lot of times people would base new Svarim in the margins of old Svarim.
So they do note that it was printed over 100 years ago. It was printed somewhere, and then they were printed later on. But again, I'm just saying, when it comes to the new edition, hopefully they're going to include and like inline all these corrections. It's really fascinating to see a Mechaber taking his own sefer and then actually being magia it. So that's pretty amazing. And then you turn to lot 6. You have Genazym. The Genazym was one of the Gedolei Olam. He was the Rav in Egypt, Mitzrayim. There's a important Tshuva Sefer for many reasons. One of the things that is very famous about this, and I think we probably spoke about this at some point, is the Pri Chadash. Reb Chizkiah da Silva goes to Egypt, and he was very upset. How could he write? Chutzpah, he wrote very sharply, and so they threw him in jail. There was a whole fight over there, and the Genazym, you can read about it extensively in the Shalosh Tshuvas Genazym. But this copy of Genazym is something that's quite common, is Hagoyes from Rekiv Eger. Rekiv Eger, as many listeners, and everyone knows, was Magia. Many of his farm, he would make corrections on his farm. What's interesting and unique about this one is that it not only has Hagoyes from Rekiv Eger, but also from Reb Shlomo Eger, his son. So you'll see a whole long Hagah, and it's signed Akiva, and then you have at the bottom another piece, and it says Shlomo. So you can actually, which is really cool to see, you have the father and then the son, and they were being Magia, the same sefer, and walking through. And by the way, some Svarim Rekiv Eger with his Hagoyes was published. Some of these Svarim with his Hagoyes were never published. It just depends on the sefer. Some yes, some no. So
it seems like any sefer he owned, he would be Magia. And in fact, some of the Hagoyes of Reb Shlomo Eger refer, like the one that featured in the catalog, it refers to Reb Shlomo refers to what is, it's written right beneath Reb Akiva Eger's Hagah, and he says Nira Sha'aba Mori was asking this, and he didn't see that. It's a very, very interesting. It's kind of a stempel from Reb Shlomo Eger on the Hagoyes of Reb Akiva Eger, which not totally necessary. But what strikes me as interesting is that Reb Akiva Eger writes in some of these Hagoyes, he writes them in Rashi letters. Some he writes them in the cursive, the rabbinic cursive that he was famous for, which that handwriting can be easily verified. And the other times he's writing in a Rashi script, probably because he intends for this to be deciphered more easily. So he writes it in Rashi letters, and even on Hagoyes like that, Reb Shlomo Eger chimes in. So that's the ultimate verification, if any was necessary.
Lot 7 continues. It's a few contrasim written by Reb Shlomo Eger, and these Reb Shlomo Eger was going to write a full sefer that he wanted to do on different halachic, basically you have arachim, just various principles laid out by Aleph Beis. These were published in the Sefer Ikrim of Reb Shlomo Eger, for those familiar with that sefer. So these are part of that. They form part of these were different, but you can see, again, it's just to see the booklets with the crossouts, with his actual manuscript. That's lot 7. Lot 8. And by the way, we're up to lot 8, only manuscripts, and these are, again, top-tier names that we're going through. There's still no Svarim yet. We're going to get to some Svarim. Is Chasam Sofer. I mean, how could you have a top-tier catalog without a manuscript of Chasam Sofer? We have 2 back-to-back, 8 and 9. This is...
This Chasam Sofer comes with a whole story here. Quite an incredible story. This is a drasha for Yom Kippur, and the focus of the drasha is on a sugya of tzaddikim, worrying for the klal, and it doesn't say the reason for that, but the reason is the Chasam Sofer didn't give the reason for that, but tradition has maintained the story, which is quite amazing. This is in 1831. That year, there was a renewal of the emperor's coronation scheduled to be in Pressburg, Erev Yom Kippur, and the renewal, its coronation, was going to turn the entire city upside down. They had already prepared avenues with all canopies and flower. Everybody was going to be on Yom Kippur. It would make it impossible to carry on a good traditional Yom Kippur. Chasam Sofer was also worried that maybe many Jews, the less affiliated, would even be Machal Yom Kippur, Chas v'Shalom. So he was very concerned about that. And this is his primary focus of his drasha. It's quite amazing. And And the more amazing part is the aftermath of the story, which his daughter said over, and it's recorded by different Talmidim. The daughter said that, guess what? As Yom Kippur was approaching, there was a terrible storm broke out. The city was flooded. All the preparations were ruined, and they had to postpone it. And in one sefer, it also says the Chazam Sofer had to pay a personal price for this miracle that he pulled off, and he fell ill right after Yom Kippur, and it took him a number of weeks to recover. So quite an amazing drasha. This drasha is also followed by a drasha for a drasha that he would give on Motzei Rosh Hashanah, which he would tell me them recount. He would often focus on L'man Yirbu Yamecha. That would be his theme, and is in fact such a drasha right here. So it's not only like you said, what kind of high end catalog, what kind of high end auction would not include a Chasam Sofer, but there's a very high end Chasam Sofer to boot.
The next lot 9, is written by a Talmud, so it's not Ksav Yad of Chasam Sofer, but this is a Talmud that was in the yeshiva, and he was writing over Chedushim that he heard from the Chasam Sofer and others, as noted here as well. And there's on Masechta Gittin, Avodah Zarah, and other Masechtas, and also quoting other, including Zarach Eidlitz and some others. So it's an interesting Ksav Yad of Torah. And this is often, sometimes we forget that a lot of these Gedalim, I mean, the Chasam Sofer I think it's known, but many of them, you see this in Eibshitz a lot, that are huge yeshivas with thousands of Talmidim over the years. And the Talmidim would write shiurim, write notes the same way Bachram today do. And so they have notes, and they surface from time to time.
Not only that, but here Genazym is very calls attention to a very important discovery. The Chasam Sofer in particular, just a sefer came out recently, a 2-volume sefer, a diary of the Chasam Sofer's life based on everything he wrote. Chasam Sofer has attracted such attention that people are looking at his chidushim, at his shiurim, at his drushes, and piecing together his life based on what he said when, what he wrote where, and when. So it's students of the Chasam Sofer have long been looking for these shiurim that the Chasam Sofer gave right when he started the yeshiva in 1807, when the Masechta they were learning was Gittin, and they haven't had those. They have Chidush Chasam Sofer from before he came to Preshburg and opened the yeshiva. They have Chidushim towards the end of his life and later Machzorim, but these Chasam Sofer aficionados are looking for these shiurim that he gave on Gittin in 1807, and they haven't found them until now. This notebook surfaces with those missing shiurim. They've had experts. Genazym has hired experts to look through this entire notebook and catalog what was said where, what we have, what we don't have. And as you would expect, there is a significant amount of chidushim, which on the Genazym website you can download that little piece of research showing what about this notebook is new and unpublished, and it's significant.
There's a autograph smicha, which is lot 10. There's autograph smicha of the Yeshuas Yaakov. Lot 11 is a tshuva of the Shalom Meshiv to Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch of Liska. And it's printed in Shalom Meshiv, but as I say, their first line is not, and then there's some other information at the end. So part of it is, and then part of it is some, that's why it's always interesting. Whenever you see a manuscript, was the whole thing or some little information that didn't make it in exactly? This is a very interesting tshuva. If someone has white hair and he's bizarre and he wants to dye his hair black. So it's quite an interesting. You can't.
And it's written to a very famous person, Tzvi Hirsch of Liska, one of the very famous Baalei Moifes, famous Hasidic Rebbe, and that's why instead of translating, the Genazym catalog is Hebrew English, here it's Hebrew Yiddish, because they know there's a lot of Yiddish readers that would very much appreciate knowing about Tzvi Hirsch Liska here. What jumps out at me, this is why I say read the catalog. You see the Ksav Yad. They transcribe the first line where he addresses Tzvi Hirsch Liska. In the catalog, it transcribes it as Harav HaGadol HaChassid HaMeforsim. But if you look at the Ksav Yad, which is the facsimiles here, I'm able to make out that it's not Harav HaGadol, it's even greater praise. It's HaMa'or HaGadol, the great light. So maybe Genazym can add that correction into the online catalog.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, you see, really amazing. Lot 12 is beautiful. First of all, it's just a beautiful old leather binding of a Torah, 2 volumes of Torah. Now it's the copy of Rabbi Shaya Pick, Rabbi Shaya Berlin, who we spoke about briefly at one point, and this has a signature and has extensive glosses. Another Gadol that was Magia, his farm, that many listeners are familiar with, have come across Rabbi Shaya Pick in his Hagois. So this one, the gloss has been never published before. Also, interestingly, as Genazym points out, that Rabbi Shai Pick writes in one of his forums that the fact that we have 1 das von Amud Aleph and 2 das von Amud Beis, he's the one who says, Rabbi Shai Pick says that, and he says, these das shall be your remembrance. You should know 1 das von Amud Aleph, 2 das von Amud Beis. So this is his tour, his copy of his tour. He's also the brother-in-law of the Zichron Yosef, as we mentioned. So
Yeah,
Go ahead.
just for a quick chazara for those who may not have the time to go find the old episodes. What we said about Rabbi Shaya Pick, by the way, the name Pick is his in-law's name where he lived, and usually that's not a problem to take such a name. Or the Maharsha, everybody knows his name after his mother-in-law, Adels. But in the case of Rabbi Shaya Pick, he did express his objection to the name Pick because there was a member of the Pick family that had apostatized and brought shame on the family, and Rabbi Shaya Berlin preferred to distance himself. Yet history has kept that name current, so he'll have to forgive us if we use the name. The apostate is long forgotten, but Rabbi Shaya Pick lives on. In every person who studies the Gemara cannot escape using Rabbi Shaya's tremendous tools and his great memory in the form of the Mesoras Hashas. A word about Mesoras Hashas quickly. The Mesoras Hashas is a play on the term Mesoira. Mesoira was in old Chumashim. You don't see it a lot in contemporary Chumashim, but if you look at the pictures of the old Tanakhs, the margins contain little notes where the words of the Tanakh are compared and noted how many times they appear, what's different about this one, what's different about that one. Those little marginal notes were created by a whole generation of people who studied the Mesoira, times before the Goyim already, times on my Ram later in Eretz Yisrael. They studied the Mesoira, and together, pooling their knowledge, they were able to write the Mesoira, which is, like the work which today we can do with computers, but in ancient times it was virtually impossible for a single scholar. Yet, when it came to Shas, all that work comparing the different Gemaras and how many times the Gemara appears and where it appears, all that work was done earlier by Rabbi Shua Boyaz, but along came Rabbi Shaya Pick, and he's able to perfect it with his just brilliant, prodigious memory, scholarship. His brother-in-law writes about how he knew an entire all of Shas, Bavli Yerushalmi Midrashim, the way we know Birchas HaShachar. That was the example he uses. So that was Rabbi Shaya Pick. The Noda B'Yehuda writes them likewise. All those who refer to him talk about his tremendous computer-like ability, his instant recall, and that's what he was able to do to the Shas. That's what he did with a lot of other Svarim that he had. He would write the Makairis, he'd write cross-referencing. Now, in this tour, he did that, but he also wrote Hagoyes. He was a tremendous scholar with very insightful things to say. So this tour carries his Hagoyes as well, which is very important. But primarily, Rabbi Shaya Pick will be forever remembered for his genius, his computer-like genius.
Then we turn to La 13, and we get to a Sephardi Gadol here. So, Moshe, this is right up your alley to talk about where this is a document, a letter for Shadar. We've talked about Shadarim on the podcast before, collecting money for Eretz Yisrael, and it's signed by the Rashash. Now, the Rashash, not Shtarashun, but the Rashash of Shalom Sharabi. So the Makubal, the great Makubal from Yemen, who moves to Eretz Yisrael, and you can see a signature, by the way, and you can see another signature next to it that's like similar style to the Chidah, for those that know that one. So you see really the beautiful Sephardi, where they have like 1 line, 2 line, 3 line, they have a loopy signature, and like all those really cool squiggles and lines. We could talk about that also. But Shalom Sharabi is also a really cool signature, and this is a major Makubal, one of the greatest Mekubalim, for those who are familiar. So Ramesh, you could talk about it as well. And this is also interestingly signed by Rabbi Yakar Gershon, who is the son of Avram Gershon of Kedover. So Gershon Kedover, this is the Baal Shem Tov's brother-in-law, his son, who, Gershon's brother moved to Eretz Yisrael. This is his son is signed in here also. So it's quite a fascinating document.
Not only is he signed here, Nachi, but he is the Shadar. Rabbi Yakar, together with others, is a Shadar. In the 1700s, there was pretty much just one Kehila in Eretz Yisrael. When Avram Gershon Kedover, the Baal Shem's brother-in-law, comes to Eretz Yisrael, comes to Yerushalayim, he joins the Sephardic Kehila. So Rav Yakar, for all intents and purposes, is a member. He probably spoke, acted, and communicated like a Sephardic. And he was chosen to represent this community together with a few others when they were in very dire straits in 1774, which is only a few years before Rashash, Reb Shalom Sharabi, died. And his signature is very rare, although it has less of the squiggles than some of the other ones, for the reason being that the Rashash came from Yemen. He came from Sana and Taiman, so he has a different... actually, he came from Sharab, born in Sharab, which is the name Sharabi, which, in my opinion, again, I was always curious about his signature, which you see here on display. It's Shalom Mizrahi Diadia Sharabi. I think... I may be wrong about this, but my hunch is that Diadia means like Hamachuna. I think his name in his native Sharab, his name was Mizrahi, but as he traveled to Eretz Yisrael, went through Bavel. The Ben Ish Chai talks about the short while he stayed in Bavel, wherever he went. Kol Makam Shadorach Kav Raglav, they remembered him with Haratza. Almost like this is about the same time, and with a similar effect to the Vilna Gaon's travels through Europe, where wherever he went, he left behind legendary accounts. The Rashash was very similar in the Sephardic world. So I think in his native Sharabi, he's known as Shalom Mizrahi, but as he left, and people are calling him Sharabi, so he added that to his nickname, Shalom Mizrahi, Diyadia Hamachuna Sharabi. I think that's what he did, and that became his name. So his son and grandson, that became the way this family signed their name, Diyadia Sharabi. So this is his signature is Rear. His personality is he's the greatest of the great of the latter day Mekubalim. He's considered the most authentic interpretation of the Arizal's Kabbalah. After the Arizal he's the next one. Although he comes from Taman, and Taman Kabbalah is not native in Taman, but he must have been such a prodigious genius that he's able to really master the art and outmaster all the others who've been studying it. He comes to the yeshiva. Legend has it that he comes and he plays the part of just a shamish who doesn't know anything, but later they discover he just can't hide his greatness, and he's appointed as the Rosh Yeshiva. He marries the Rosh Yeshiva's daughter, and the rest is a matter of public record about Reb Shalom Sharabi.
Yeah, he has many Talmidim, including the Chida, and many others, Chaim de la Rosa, Big Makobel, so many famous Talmidim. Now, Lot 14 is really one of the most fascinating items in the catalog. Genazym makes a point, which they're right, that it's a hidden treasure of 70 autograph letters of Austro-Hungarian Jewish history, so 1843, 1847, which is really a window onto this world. However, but additionally, the part that's really fascinating is, what is this? Where's this letter? We talked about Shadarim, sometimes we'd go around, we discussed in the past with the Chida, and they would have different, they would sign it. Today you have a Tuda, but then you would have the Rav would actually sign his name. Right, the Chida had these problems because no one could read the Sephardi signatures, like, who are you, a fraud, whatever. This one was a ger. Now we know his name, Rav Avram Goldschmidt of Pax from Hungary, and he went and he was forced to go collect money. In 1843, he had financial hardship. He had to support his family, so he went around the community. So this is kind of his personal ledger, if you will, going around. And he had different rabbanim. You can see the signatures in the category. Rabbi Asad, Rabbi Sholev, and others. You can see them signing here in different places. You have the father of the Rugas Abaysim, actually, and you have some others. But again, and there are others, as they note as well. You have community rabbanim, leaders, gaboim, those in charge of charitable societies. You would have societies in those days. So all different places would sign on here. And then this is all for this ger that is going around trying to collect money. This is his big, thick ledger. This is his big, thick book that you can see.
And included in them is all these wax stamps, the seals, which are peeling, but in some cases you hardly ever see those today. I remember other earlier auctions have preserved some of the seals, the actual metal seal, which they used to imprint on the hot red wax. But the wax often didn't survive. But in this book, it's been very, very well preserved. And there's a lot of almost, every other page you'll see has this big blotch of the red wax stamped. It's a piece of history of Hungarian rabbinic history in your hand right here.
Okay, lot 15. So I'll talk about the Sefer. The Sefer itself is very chashuv Sefer. It's the Tzedla Derech of Rabbi Nachman ben Abzarach from Spain, and this is a very, very important Sefer of one of the Rishonim. However, what's fascinating is that in the middle of the Sefer, there is a poem that is composed. It says, composed by Rabbi Yitzchak, extolling the praises of the work with an acrostic of his full name. Who is that poem? So this poem is divided into three columns. So it's Yitzchak ben Shimshon HaKohen. Who is that? And it's dated to 1609 because it has the gematria Tzedla Derech. So who is this? This is the son-in-law of the Maral of Prague. So just a few words about who he is. We don't know that much about him. There's a Sefer, Yitzchak Katz, who the son-in-law, he was the Rav of the Avbezin in Nikolsburg, Vienna, he was in Prague. Who was he? There was a Sefer that was published it's Ala Torah, but in Yonei Nisun Ubris Mila, like Gematrias, Properus, very interesting style stuff. It's called Chassan Dam. It was a beautiful new edition published recently by Machon Netzach Yaakov, and this edition, so this Sefer was put out in Prague. Now, the editor of the Sefer, the Moitzi La'ar, when he came to publish it, he realized that there's two parshias of the Sefer that are missing. There's nothing there on the Sefer. Now, there's a whole shiloh who the Sefer was. You can read the new, highly recommend reading that intro to the Netzach Yaakov, when you can kind of get it. They have a whole thing about who it was. There was one of the Rishonim from Mainz, Reb Zalman Runkel, and you could read there was two of them. Which one was it? It's a fascinating introduction, a lot of fascinating information that they were able to uncover. However, what happened? One of the parashias that are missing is Parshas Vayelech. And the publisher put in a little short few paragraphs that's worth reading, I think. It's just El Ena Koire Bechiber HaKetzara. Someone reading this short, it's a very short work. Someone reading this, I want to tell you about it. Me Haidana Lenachin, I want to let you know. When I was working at the press, the publisher's work, Nischadishli became known to me, Ki Loi Nimtza B'Sefer Zeh, there was nothing found in this work, Klum B'Parshas V'Yetzei Me'Mechaber Mishu. Whoever this author was, and you didn't know, there was nothing on Parshas V'Yetzei, V'Lo Yadati Ma'Hoyle. I don't know what happened to it. V'chein Acher Kain, Bigashti Halim, the Parshas Vayelech Moshe, and I got to Parshas Vayelech, and I see that there's nothing here either. Ulebakashosi nispatzer v'nispayesli. I went and I shepherded, and I got him. He agreed to me. Achosid alov nemar sifsei koyin yishmerudas. The chosid that they say sifsei koyin yishmerudas. Who hagoyin? This is the goyin. Reish mesifta v'daina. Kirav ashi v'ravina. Marav harabenu yizcha koyin yizya. So yizya stands for Yira Zerach Yarachem Amin. Chsan, the son-in-law, Hagoyin, Hagodl, Moifis Derenu, Asher Shivcha Yachlinu Lo Yachilnu Lamalal. We can't say enough Shevach about him. Ein Goyim Lava Halal. It's a famous quip. You don't say Halal. Marab Leva Yizya. So who is that? The Maral. Lechadish, I went over to him, he agreed to Lechadish Kol Pam Ashetala Mitzudasai Lefum Riata, whatever he's doing, Lefishas Tchak Ulachatz Amatvis. If he didn't have a lot of time, we went and we said, we need this, we're going to print, we need something, it's blank. Leman lo yikruchu korcha beis citrus elamei sefer. No, they shouldn't be empty. By the way, you see the beautiful Melitza that they wrote always in Prague. So they didn't want to have missing two parashias. V'hina me parapris sichas chulin. Sifsei koyin tzedek merav Rabbi Yitzchak Gizia Niskar b'schus tovel of bracha. And it's interesting that this whole intro is in Vayelech. So it's not earlier in the Sefer Bereshis. In Vayetze, it's in Vayelech. And it's very interesting. It's like Ramazim, Mashikal Kabbalistic. They're very interesting to kind of read. But one of the things that he says is, Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ben Meva Esmer Shana Anoich Hayoim. See, I'll read it short. He says, Remez Lem Oid, he told them, that you'll go and you'll be ready. Yinchulu Bezer Lamas, you get two worlds. So Moshe is saying, Zeu Anoich Hayoim, Michlal Dekamacher. It sounds like there's another day. What do you mean Moshe is 120 years today? What's tomorrow? There's another world. He says, Anoich Hayoim, Leuchal Oid, Begamatria, Shalis Meis for Esra. He says, also Gamatria 310. L'ramid Yud Shina Lamas, She'asar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, L'hanchel L'chol Tzadik, V'tzadik B'shil Kach. When he auctions. So he's very, and then he goes on, and there's more Ramazim. So you can read it for those interested. That's the little snippet of the Torah, and some other places, but that's a little snippet of the Torah of this son-in-law of the Maral, this great son-in-law of the Maral. And here we see his poem that he wrote here in the Tzed Laderech with the acrostic, and you can actually see it's quite fascinating to see, and that is Lot 15. We get to Lot 16 is a beautiful, just really handsome bundle you can see, and it's actually 3 Sfarim of the Abarbanel printed together, and this is Kushta, Constantinople, 1506, 3 of the classics of the Abarbanel, Rosh Hashanah, which is the fundamentals of faith. This is his work defending the Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrim from the Sefer Ikrim's 3, and the Ikrim's attack, kind of, if you will, Zevach Pesach, which is the Abarbanel's Haggadah, and the third one is Nachal's Avos, the Abarbanel's commentary on Pirkei Avos. Also, the Abarbanel is in Italy at this time, but the Abarbanel dies in 1508. So these Sfarim are printed in the lifetime of the Abarbanel. And again, 1506, beautiful copies. They have a really beautiful title page. They all have the same woodcut going around the title page. So these are 3 Sfarim of the Abarbanel. That's Lot 16. Lot 17, we get to another Constantinople, a Kushta. This is 1515. This is Zoyer Harakia by the Tashbats, and this is on the Azharis of Rav Shlomo ben Gavirol. So Ramesh, I'll turn it to you as someone who says Azharot, probably as a Sfardi on Shavuos, Ashkenazi here. Okay, I don't. So I'm going to turn this over to you to talk about this item.
Yeah, Azharot were, I think we gave a podcast about it once too, but no reason not to refresh. The Azharot are poems which contain the Taryag mitzvahs. And that was a minig Shavuos time when we got the Taryag mitzvahs, we got the Torah. So there was a minig, a Spanish minig. The Rambam refers to people in Spain, the Meshorim of Spain, who wrote Azharot. There were very many of them. Very many. It was a celebrated genre of poetry to write all the Azharot in a poem. So one of the best ones was Reb Shlomo ben Gibirol. That was the one that was preserved for posterity. That was the one that was most famous said over. But there are others as well. And of course, it's not only in Spain. There's one from France, Rabbi Leo Azukin. There's others. But this is the famous one. This is the one that's preserved most in most Sephardic traditions. Later on, we'll see that even the Yemenite Siddur has it. So this is it's a very famous one that's representing a birol, but it's just a poem. It's a poem. He doesn't talk about what makes him classify what as a mitzvah and what's not a mitzvah. Are things separate mitzvah? Are they the same? Does he count the same thing twice? He doesn't get into it. It's beautiful, inspired poetry, but it does not talk more than that about it. But then there's very many pirushim on them. The greatest of which is this pirush of the Zohar HaRakia of the Rashbatz, which is really, although he writes it as a pirush on Reb Shlomo, it's essentially its own sefer on mitzvahs, on the topic of minyan mitzvahs, and it's used as such by all the mefarshim. If anyone learns the sugi, if you look at Sefer Mitzvah Rambam, look at the mefarshim on the Sefer Mitzvah Rambam, they constantly refer to Zohar HaRakia, because Zohar HaRakia is the Rashbatz's pirush, where he also explores his own opinions about what and how to make the minyan mitzvahs, and that's what makes it a very very important sefer. And this edition, particularly the Kushta edition, the first edition, was extremely rare already in the Chida's times. The Chida, writing in the 1700s, write about how rare it is to find the sefer. So it's a very, very rare. This one is preserved beautifully, like all Genazym Svarim are top quality, and also the sefer itself is, of course, of great importance.
Yeah, nice new binding. Lot 18 is a Kushta Reish, also 1510. This is one of the Yisoidik Yisvarim in Klali Talmud and Klali Psak, which is the Sefer Halichas Olam of Rabbi Shua Levi, interestingly of Tlemcen or Tamchan, I'm not sure I pronounce it, in Algeria, and he actually escapes persecutions in 1477 and heads north to Spain, which later on, sadly, a few decades later, will be headed out of Spain, but there he is then. And this is a classic. This is still in print, a classic that's still studied. And the Rabbi Yosef when he wrote his Sefer on Klolim, he kind of did it as like notes and additions to Halichas Olam rather than his own Sefer. So that's how important this Sefer is. Lot 19 is a Kushta Reish as an Ibn Ezra, a commentary of Ibn Ezra al Torah in 1514. Then we get to Salonika, another from that era, it's 1543, a little later, Sefer Meir Sha'arim. Is that one. Then Lot 21 is a Rekanati al Torah. This is a Bamberg, 1523 in Venice, and this is the first Kabbalistic Sefer ever published. And this Sefer is written al Torah. It's the Rekanati al Torah. I know it's called Recanti for those that are like, what is he talking about? Rekanati is really how it should be in Italian. And so this is the Sefer, and you can read it. Has one of those real original Bamberg title pages. There's very little. Stay tuned for the AuctionChatter series on print coming soon. But it says Pirush al HaTorah al Derech HaEmes, actually how it's written. And then you can see La Chacham HaKodesh Rabbi Nachum and Rekanati Zatzal. It says Matves al Daniel Bambergi. It says Bishnas Reish Pei Gimel. So that's where it's from. And it says Antwerp. That was the Middle East. Daniel Bamberg was Dutch, and he ended up coming down to Italy. But again, stay tuned on that. There's a Lot 22. There's the first edition to the Kunei Zaire in Mantua.
It's considered the first Kabbalistic Sefer ever printed in 1523. This is the first, before the Zaire was printed and before anything else was printed. This is the first Kabbalah Sefer printed because it's a Pirush al Derech HaEmes. The Rekanati is the first one to use the Zaire, which he cites over 500 times. I think he cites it as the Medrash of Shem Bar Yochai. But that's he used the Zohar, of course, before it was really before anyone else really even got hold of it. He had it, and he wrote his Pirush based on the Zohar.
Lot 24 is a manuscript, some pages from Reb Chaim Vital. Lot 25, not however, I mean it's a manuscript of Reb Chaim Vital. It's pretty amazing. But Lot 25, which really caught my eye, is teachings of Reb Chaim Vital. This Ksav Yad, a full manuscript, a full book. This is a Shar HaPesukim, and as Genazym notes, this was never printed. This version, and many of these manuscripts have little variations, but this one there are Hagoyes from a Makubal, and there is the signature, and this was owned by the Chida. So the Chida had owned many Sfarim, he came across many Sfarim, and he wrote his names in many Sfarim, and he always added his signature to it, and we see in this one that you see it was passed down. So you have this Chida writes here that he came across Sefer and he owned this Sefer, which is pretty fascinating to see.
The version here is unique because Reb Chaim Vital's writings, Reb Chaim Vital famously wrote all of the Arizal's Torah in Shmoina Sha'arim, 8 Sha'arim. He divided Arizal's teachings to him, which was in the span of a year or even less. He was taught all the Soidas HaKabbalah by the Arizal, and this is the 8 Sha'arim, this is the Shar HaPesukim. Now, after Reb Chaim Vital wrote it down, his son Reb Shmuel expanded on it based on other notes, based on his father's additions from Ksav Yad, other writings. So the version that was disseminated later was the one from Reb Shmuel Vital's recension of Reb Chaim Vital's giving over of the Torah of the Arizal. But this is the original one. This is a copy of the original. They say it's never been printed. I wonder if I think just this year that Avat Shalom published the Madura Kama of the Sharm. I wonder if this is included. So I'd have to check that. But this is the Madura Kama. This is Reb Chaim Vital's. Now the Guf HaSefer is not written by Reb Chaim Vital, but there's Hagoyes on the side. I think that maybe from Reb Chaim Vital's corrections. I'm not sure about that, but this is the Madura Kama, which is what the Chidah learned.
Okay, then we move on to Lot 26, which is 2 Sfarim of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. So interestingly, it says in the catalog 2 Kabbalistic Sfarim bound together. What is it? Matpachas Sfarim and Tzitzim U'Prachim. So Tzitzim U'Prachim can be termed a Kabbalistic Sefer. Matpachas, I don't know if I would term it as a Kabbalistic Sefer. Go back and listen to the Sfarim Chatter series on the reception of the Zohar. This is this Sefer of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. In fact, not what the right word is, commenting many glosses on the Zohar and about the authorship of the Zohar. And in fact, they actually quote in here, in the Genazym catalog, the quip of the Chalam Sefer, Dover Gadol Dibra Anovi, in Metbachas. And again, I'm not going to go over that whole story again, but these are the copies to Metbachas and Tzitzim U'Prachim printed in Altona, Bebeis HaMachaber. Yaakov Emden famously had a printing press in his house, in his basement. The analogy I think he used, he was like, he had his own social media, he had his own press, he was able to just crank out books and pamphlets and whatever he wanted. He had just to have it in his basement. So this is you can see these editions of Rabbi Yaakov Emden from Rabbi Yaakov Emden. There's another Sefer Rabbi Yaakov Emden, but this one is Hapados VaPorkin, but this one is being promoted here as it's the first Sefer to mention the Baal Shem Tov. There's a mention of the Baal Shem Tov in this Sefer, and this is in Altona in 1769.
This is it's part of the story. It's part of the Yavitz's quest to vanquish Shabsois and the Shabsois' evil offspring, the Frankist movement. So he published in this Sefer Hapados VaPorkin, which deals with It's some of the texts from the Kadmonim, including a parak from Emunos V'Deis and Reb Tzadi Goin, the Geras Hashmad of the Rambam, the Geras HaMesim of the Rambam, with his Hagoyes, which, by the way, I'm not sure that have been preserved. I'm not sure if they've been published elsewhere. I think you have to get them from the Hapados VaPorkin. If you're studying the Rambam's Ksavim and you want the Hagoyes of the Yavitz, that's where to find them. But then he includes at the end the Maisa Noira B'Pedolia. Maisa Noira B'Pedolia is where the Frankists forced the Jewish community to debate them with the government, with the Christian, under the auspices of the church, and miraculously there was a very anti-Semitic priest of the Bishop of Podolia who met a terrible end right after the debate was over, and he burned the Sfarim, I think, as a result. So he met a terrible end. That was the Yavitz calls it the Mice and Noir of Podolia. Now, involved in this debate was Rabbi Yisrael of Mezhebish, Baal Shem, the Yavitz.
Beis Shin,
right? That's Baal Shem. He was already known to the Yavitz then. I wonder how much the Yavitz later in other writings talks about Hasidus with very disparagingly, early Hasidus. But I wonder to what degree. I've wondered this aloud before, and I'll probably wonder it aloud again. I wonder to what degree in the 1750s when this is stories taking place. I wonder to what degree it was known to the public. The Baal Shem's association with the new Hasidic movement. To me, it's not 100% clear, and maybe this is additional proof to that.
It looks like there's a stamp. It looks like it's the copy of Rabbiner Israel Hildesheimer. This one, it looks like, if I'm reading the stamp correctly, we see the stamp of who this copy was owned by over here. And then we'll continue on. There's a number of Hasidic Svarim as we often run through the Chassidus Ram a little quicker, but you have the first Chassidus ever printed in Slavita and Rav Yevi. Then you have the first edition of Tanya. There's the third volume in 1799, lifetime of the Baal Tanya. There's Sefer Beis Halevi, but the Chassidus Sefer Beis Halevi from is Lot. And then there's Likuti Eitzis of Menachem Breslov is Lot 32. There's the first Chassidus Sefer printed in Eretz Yisrael, which is Lot 34. Lot 35 is the signature of the Heilige Basayin. So that's Tzfas 1839, and you can see the whole signature. Genazym has a 4-page spread over here. Obviously, the Basayin was a big tzaddik and has been, don't know if it's a renaissance or becoming more well known today in many ways. And so to see his actual signature here, you have the whole signature written out. Again, as with the lots in the beginning, I guess I didn't include it there because this is like the Hasidic section. This seemed like a theme of this auction. A lot of these really signatures of these big gedolim are with others. So there are others on this document as well, but one of the signatures is the Basayan. And by the way, what is this about? It's about a sale of a seat in the shul. This is something, olden times, you look at it and you're like, what? They were having shtaris, but all their abbonim signing on like a seat in the shul. You think today, like, you're fighting over a seat. You have a seat in shul. You don't have a seat in shul. You show up in shul. Today, we daven in one place. Shacharis, another place. Even on Shabbos, right? You're Friday night in the guy's house, and Shacharis, you go to shul, and Micha, Shabbos, you go whatever. And Marav Motzei Shabbos in the guy's house again. So like whatever, you some shtibel or whatever you are. It's not like a big deal. Like my seat in shul, I need a psak, I need the bas ayin to sign on that I bought the seat and it's my seat.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Nachi. Just first of all, it's the Rizal shul in Sfas, so it's a unique shul. But you have to be right. You're definitely right. Anyway, the shul was a much more prominent part of people's lives with chazakis and fights and Yerushas too. People eat Yarish in a seat.
In Germany especially. No, and you see, and that's why this one says, in English, the sale detailed on the other side of the leaf is valid and binding. And that's what it says, so is the cut of Ram Doiv of average residing in the holy city of Sfas may rebuild and establish between our days. I mean, reading the English translation, the Basai and others are signing on this. It's a big deal. It's not like you buy a seat for you give some membership a few $100. It's $1,000, whatever it is. It's a big deal. Seats are a big deal. And in Germany, this is Yerusha. In other kilos also. Again, it's just to see this now. It's ironic. And, you see this seat. Now it's the Basayan's Heilige signature, which is true. But you're like, it was a seat fight. When you actually, sometimes when you sit and you look at the documents, right, and you look at the historical importance of what we're looking at and what was going on then and what was important then. But today we're like, what?
Exactly right. I remember reading once about how if someone had a claim against somebody else, there was laws governing if they were allowed to stop the Kriyas HaTorah, stop the shul proceedings. And there was certain times it was justified, certain it wasn't justified. But that was today if somebody did that, you just walk out. But again, it was unthinkable then. That was part of their life, and someone stopping the Kriyas HaTorah is stopping life, and the matter has to be adjudicated right then and there.
Yeah, different times, but that is Lot 35. Lot 36 is an autographic Saviat of the Sfas Emes. Lot 37 is the personal sit of the Imri Yosef of Spinka. Sorry, so you have then you have there's other various autographs, Kisiyadas, many Hasidic Sfarim over here that we're running through. You have Lot 42, maybe very interesting. A lot of people. This is Satmarov, actually, Biel of Satmar. By the way, we're recording this on his yard site for the listeners. This will be released later, but we actually are, and this is his response to the establishment of the state of Israel. You can see a 2-page manuscript.
This is this is like maybe his first writings on the subject. Later, he would write voluminous works detailing his shita about the Shalosh Shavuos and Agula Latmur and etc. About all the about his esnagdus to the secular state of Israel. But this is right. It's undated, they say, but it's just the teichen of the letter seems to be written right after the founding of the state of Israel, and it's written to a relative of his. And the Satmar Rebbe says, "I'm astonished that you seem to be looking at the current events as if this is something special. This is terrible. This is Chevlei Mashiach. Hatziyonis Himinis Yonis Chevlei Mashiach. This is the very early, maybe the earliest version of Rabbi Elish's shita being put down in writing."
So then there is Lot 43 is a letter of the Kol Aryeh, and then we have, again, various more. Then go ahead.
Lot 44 is very unique. It's the original Skver, the father of the contemporary Skver Rebbe, about inviting his Mechutton to the Chassan of the Skver Rebbe. It's a full letter by the previous Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, and those are considered very rare. This one is from 1959, but probably very of great interest to Hasidim.
Lot 45 is very nice. Another manuscript. This is Rabbi Yosef Engel, the Avazan of Krakow, and this is our Chidushim of Yerushalmi Zroim. So what's also interesting, and you can see this in the picture, is that while these were published in Gilyani Hashas, many listeners are very familiar with that, there are crossouts all over. You can see full paragraphs. He just boxed around it and crossed it out. However, he didn't cross it out. You can't read it. He just drew a big box around, let's say 6 lines, and then drew 1, 2, 3 lines, throughout. Those Chidushim were not published. So you can read, there was some, I think it's the Maral and Agadata, they came and they published, and they wrote Mechikas HaKulmis, and they printed, the crossouts of the Havamina of the Maral, whatever that is worth. So here you have a base of Engel, you have these crossouts of Hagarini base of Engel that were not published in this manuscript in Lot 45, and you can see them and you can read them. Lot 46 is a Bamberg Tanakh, Venice 1525, a full set in its original binding. You can see with the clasps. So there are those old wooden leather bindings. They have those metal clasps that you can actually close the safer, which you don't really have anymore. Then there's another.
Keep out those bookworms.
No, well, that too. Lot 47 is a Chumash that they call Chumash Avua because it's a commentary of the second Music Avua, I believe. This is in Venezia, 1548. Lot 48 is a beautiful this is actually looks like a 3-volume set of the Mitsudas. And this is, the Mitsudas was first printed in Livorno, and it actually has the full fold-out map in here, which is quite rare. So you can Mitsudas stuff and Mitsudas Sien. Lot 49 is a Tehillim printed in Amsterdam, one from the press of Menashe ben Israel, famous press. Then there are a set of Machzorim from Yom Kippur, Livorno 1797, that's Lot 51. Again, another one where you have the metal clasps on the binding on that one. Lot 53, first of all, it's beautiful. You should go look at this one. This is a tichlal. It has beautiful color illustrations. It's got a luxurious box. But, Ramesha, what is a tichlal? What is that?
A tichlal is kolboy. There's a machzer kolboy. A kolboy, it's koilo. That's the Hebrew word and the Arabic word are almost the same here. Tichlal is a compendium, literally in English, of daily prayers and yearly prayers, things that you need for all year round. In Yemen, the culture of printing was non-existent. Svarim that were not imported had to be written by hand. So that up until the modern era, this is written in 1939, handwritten sefer from 1939. There's a siddur written. We even know who wrote it. It was a very important Yemenite Rav, Mori Shalom Korach, from the famous Korach families of Yemen that came to Israel and established themselves there. Very prominent rabbinic family. This is his siddur that he wrote out and illustrated. There's different colors. It's beautiful. Calligraphy and artwork is absolutely amazing. So it's a handwritten siddur for all year round. It has for Rosh Hashanah in there, and I noticed flipping through the pages on the Genazym catalog, for Rosh Hashanah before Tkiyas Shofar, in some Machzorim it says, this is where someone, the elder of the congregation, should get up and say words of Divrei Kivushim, Divrei Musar. And I always thought to myself, what better Musar is there than to read the Rambam's words about Tkiyas Shofar, Afal Pi Gzeres HaKosavu. There's a Remez Yesh Boi, Uri Yeshenu Mishinaschem, and to my delight, in this Yemenite, Yemenites are very addict to the Torah of the Rambam. That is reproduced in its entirety right before Tkiyas Shofar. I wonder, this is what I alluded to earlier. In Yemen, there were two basic minhagim. There was the baladi. Baladi means, balad is makom in Arabic. The minhag, the baladi means the original, the minhag hamakom, the original Yemenite minhag hamakom, which is very, very similar to the Rambam. Some will say they adopted the Rambam's nusach. Rav Yosef Kabach and other Yemenites like to believe the other way around. The Rambam adopted the Yemenite nusach. Take that as you will. That's the original. The Baladi is the more original one. And then there's the Minig Shami. Shami means the Azer of Eretz Yisrael, Syria, the north. Sham is north. So the Minig Shami is the northern Minig, which means the influence of the Sephardic Edot HaMizrach nusach, which came down to Yemen. I couldn't figure out, just from what I can tell over here, from this siddur, is this which minig is it? I do know that the later mishpachas koirach, they like to minimize the differences. Say there's no big deal. Bavachi chavan li l'shamayim. They're traditional. It's a traditional rabbinic family, but in their mind, there's not much of a difference. I couldn't tell from this siddur, but on the page displayed here in the catalog, right away they have for Shavuos they have the azharot. Elu azarot shel Rav Rabbeinu Shlomo ben Gebir Zatzal nahagu lekroisen b'chag HaShavuos. I wonder if that's being that the source of that is the Spanish Rite. I wonder if that's I'm leaning again. I don't know. Experts will have to weigh in on this, but I'm leaning to say that this minig is this siddur is the minig shami. But I don't know for sure.
And by the way, you want to see something beautiful in this catalog? Take a look at this Lot 53. It's gorgeous, and this is it's amazing. The manuscript, it looks like it was printed, like the way they wrote it out with the illustrations is gorgeous. Lot 54 is a selection of 17 Masechtas of Bamberg. They're incomplete volumes, so we've talked about the Bamberg Shas, and stay tuned, I'll talk about more. Lot 55 is the Masechtas Sanhedrin and Shavuos of the Chazon Ish with many manuscript marginal notes of the Chazon Ish. And they have a picture of Chaim Kanievsky learning from this Gemara. They say, so I guess Chaim learned from this Gemara as well, but it's the Chazon Ish's with the Chazon Ish's handwritten glosses. I mean, that would be the attraction. So it's pretty amazing. You can check that out. That's lot 55.
Were they printed or were they not? It seems that they were never printed in this form, although possibly the Chazon Ish himself culled some of the ideas and included them in a sefer. But this is a very, very important item, of course.
Right. Some yes, some no. There's many also. The Chazon Ish is another one that has many glosses. Lot 56 is the commentary of the Chassid Yavitz on Masechta Avos. This is Adrianople, 1555. This is a rare print. Then there is the first edition of the Marsha in Basel, 1600. It's interesting that it was printed in Basel, the Marsha. Whenever you see that, it comes up. Then you get to lot 58. Is Minhagin Ashkenaz. This is a manuscript with many early editions. It actually has a very interesting colophon, which, again, I keep saying stay tuned for the series, but that's why we're doing this series. Like, Genazym throughout this has, like, Sifrei Yisoid, Genazym has a book. I don't think we ever did a podcast specifically on the book. Did we? On Sifrei Yisoid. We should tell Genazym, we should definitely do a podcast on the Sifrei Yisoid. The Genazym made actually a second edition of their beautiful Yisoid Gesvarim. And they always reference, like, it has, like, their special logo, and I'll say, like, Sifrei Yisoid. You can go check out the Genazym catalog. So it's the same thing. I'm like, go listen to the Svarim series in early print, and we'll talk about some of this stuff.
I think if you do enough Genazym podcasts, I mean, you're going to get all the Sifrei Yisoid.
No, but about just even what they did. Right, exactly. Right. So here we have a colophon. There's actually quite a nice colophon where they say when they finish it off, when they finish writing this, Siyamti Yosei Yud Tes Yomam L'Chodesh Av Reish Tes Vav. Actually, we're recording this now in Av, so that's quite interesting. And it says Leprat Kotan B'Masad Darshitin Uma Kotan Lavlor Yitzchok Bar Mishalim. So the story for Yitzchok Bar Mishalim. This is a very interesting Ashkenazi Minhagim. But I want to talk about a little bit about the next lot, which is lot 59, which is Sefer HaMinhagim, Riva de Trento, 1559. This is the Minhagim of Rav Ram Kloisner. Now, this is a very, very, very important sefer. You know, I think it is known, but sometimes it's not well known. The Sefer Minhagim, there's a whole bunch of them. Isaac Tirna, the Mechon Shalom has reprinted a whole selection of them, a whole slew of these. But what's interesting about this one, Rav Ram Kloisner, so we don't know that much about Rav Ram Kloisner. So his name Kloisner sounds like it was a Klois, it was like an old Koilel. That's like what it sounds like. His name is Kloisner. And we know that that Rav Kloisner was in this area in Europe. We're talking about the area in Europe. It's part of the Chachmei Österreich, which is Austria in Europe at the time. And this is, again, we're talking 14th century, around that time, late 14th century. And afterwards, you get the Maril talking about him. And again, you have the Talmud of Isaac Tirna. Isaac Tirna told us in one of his rebbeim when he was in Vienna. And he calls him Atayr Hagodler, Avram Kloisner, Rebbe Muvak, Shemi Ikre, Toishve Österreich, Baki, V'yodeya Ikr Minhagim, Umiyam Avana Shaisim. And he was Ikr Minhagim, he knew the main Minhagim. And so this was a big deal. Minhagim and Ashkenaz was always a big deal. And also, it's Befrat, these Doris, there's a famous book about this that goes through the Ashkenazim in the 14th and 15th centuries and how they can say. We're talking also the Tkufa a little bit of Maril, and you have the Tkufa of the Chumas Hadeshen, and again Ram Kloisner and Isaac Tirna, and a whole slew of others. But what's interesting also about the Sefer Minhagim, this Sefer that not only is it very important, I just want to mention also the Sefer that the actual body of the text of the Sefer, if you will, is mainly coming from Chaim Paltiel and others. It's actually not from Kloisner, but you'll see there's always says Hagah. The Hagahs are the part that's from Kloisner. He was adding on, or he was compiling it or putting it together. It seems like it was worked over various Rabbanim, various Ashkenazi Rabbanim, and they've written Minhagim over the generations. Many Minhagim in here you'll read and you'll say, oh, that's very similar. That's what we do actually. And this is where it actually, many of these Minhagim come from here.
It's important to note also that today we use the term minig for something that's less halachic, like which zemer you're going to sing and which direction you're going to shuckle, or things of lesser import. But in this context, in the context we're discussing, minhagim is the bedrock of Ashkenazi halacha. Like, for example, the way the Shulchan Aruch broke in on the world, it was the halachas of the Beis Yosef. But the Beis Yosef's halachas only represent the consensus of Sephardic Posachim. So the Ramah had to say, well, even though from a halachic standpoint it's valid what he's saying, but our minig is to follow other psakim. So the minhagim in this context means the minig of halacha, the minig of psak that we follow. That's really what the minhagim are often more machmer. Not always, not exclusively, but often the Ramah will say, but we have a minig based on the Bali Toises who learn the sugya differently, and they come out with another halacha. So these minhagim is the bedrock of Ashkenazi psak in essence.
Lot 60 is quite an interesting sefer. It's Livorno, 1832, so it's mid-19th century, a little later. Zivchei Ratzon, it's printed in Hebrew and Italian on the laws of Bedika, Shchita and Bedika, and a Nicker. What's interesting today is, I think we've talked about this, and if we haven't, it's good to make the point how Shchita is something today. It's like you go to the store and you buy chicken, you buy meat, whatever was the big deal. But back then, you have to have a sheichet, and it was a whole big deal. So here they actually have like illustrated, really cool illustrations of animals and organs and chabia. They're really these nice pictures, if you will, throughout this Hebrew, Italian, and Italian sefer. Lot 61 is a drasha of the Ramban. It says drasha Ramban lefnei Melech ve'asorim. This is printed in Prague in 1596. So lefnei Melech ve'asorim. This is the disputation of Barcelona. Genazym did a really nice illustration or AI. Yeah, they actually wrote AI illustration. So it's an AI illustration. You kind of see the style. And it's an AI illustration. See, AI is coming for catalogs also.
I mean, throughout the catalog, they've got very nice color pictures of Kiveger, Chasam Sofer, and this Fasemes, and everybody. They're using AI in the best way possible, bringing the Gedolim back to real life portraits.
What's really nice, I want to give full credit. Again, this podcast is sponsored by Genazym, but full credit, they wrote AI illustration. We could see it's AI illustration. So right, that it's an AI illustration. They wrote that it is. When you have a picture of Gedolim, it's AI. It's not just like, just whatever. I believe they did it in the last catalog as well. There's a first edition of the Shlah, which is pretty amazing. What else could we say about the Shlah? That's lot 62. Here you can see it. That's from 1648, Yirtach, actually. Last 63 is Morinayim with revised pages. So we've talked about it. It was De Rossi and Morinayim and the Ban and the Cherem and the Ganze Maisa, because Genazym had, when a prior auction, one of those, with the paste down, with the whole famous, yes, Bis of Karo, nor Bis of Karo, Bis of Karo, with Al-Shech, etc., against Morinayim. So they have here, there's a first edition of Torah Sa'ila of the Ramah, first edition Prague, 1570. That's the Ramah Sefer, right? He says philosophy and Kabbalah is just the same thing, Be'etzem. So that's the Sefer lot 64. There's a letter from the Merle Diskin, in which is the next lot, and then lot 64, lot 65. That's lot 65. I'm sorry. Lot 66 is the original will of Rav Shmuel Salant, Yerushalayim 1603, and then there's Chedushei Torah from the Netziv, which is lot 67, a 3-page letter. So you have a lot of really. I'll run through a few of them, and then Ramesh, you can to say where you want to talk about. Lot 68 is a Ksav Yad and Shiurim of Reb Chaim and Reb Chaim Soloveitchik and Brisker Rov. Not written by them. And then there's a letter of the Chavetz Chaim, which is in lot 69. There's a long, long tshuva on the halachic status of descendants of Anusim from Meir Shapiro, the founder of Yefirmi, Meir Shapiro of Lublin. There is a Ksav Yad of the Rogatchover, which is lot 71. So there's some really amazing, I think we can stop over there if you want to chime in on any of these. Blaise Yudel Finkel, there's a lot 72, which is a manuscript of Shiurim handwritten by him in Mir 1923. So you really have a lot of really wonderful, we had like the Lita selection here, Lithuanian Gedolim of different Kisvei Yadas.
It's impossible in the little time that we have to do justice to all these the Kisvei Yad, but like you said, these are just this is the highest end selection you could ever have. The Reb Shmuel Salant letter in lot 66 is the tzava of Reb Shmuel Salant. This is his actual tzava, which very very personal, very touching. The letter from the Netziv, the 3 pages on of Halach Chidushei Torah, is about Shemitah. This is in 1876, written before the Shemitah Heter Mechira controversy really erupts in 1889. That Shemitah, this 2 Shemitah cycles prior to that. Already, Reb Shmuel Salant is already laying the groundwork for the heter. Can you rely on that Shemitah B'zman says not Deiraisa? And then the Netziv, who famously held that it is, responds in kind, and he ends his letter to Reb Shmuel Salant with a little poem. He knows that it's a contentious topic, so he says, "Hashem Yamideinu al Keren ha'emes v'atachlis v'ha'chos emes." Vesakinter chaysemes. Kinter means controversy and ill intent. Chaysemes with a samach means it blocks it and muzzles it. Ugmul toy v'nitzchi mishalemes. So it's a very very. The Tziv was poetic. He had a poetic soul, and he signs off his letter that way to Reb Shmuel Salant. The Torah of Brisk that you mentioned is like we had a couple hundred years earlier. This is a notebook from a student learning by the Brisker Rov. Brisker Rov is more in Shlita, and the Brisker Rov is telling him chidushim of Reb Chaim. It's all written down. I don't think we know who wrote this notebook, but the Genazym did research, and they know that this notebook was presented to Reb Meir Soloveitchik. Reb Meir Soloveitchik looked through it and felt it is authentic, and it contains chidushim that were never otherwise printed. The Rogatchover tshuva has never been printed before. Reb Meir Shapiro's tshuva in lot 70, it's about a shayla that wasn't really relevant for the most part in Rav Meir Shapiro's lifetime in 1925, but this was a very major shaila, which we have mentioned here in the podcast before, in the 1600s and 1700s, when Anusim started leaving Spain. Descendants of Anusim, and were now forming their own communities. Did these Anusim require any kind of gerus, or were they just regular Jews of good standing, having been a few generations removed from observant Yiddishkeit? So Rav Meir Shapiro, the great Bucky that he was, great Goyen that he was, he's being mefalpel with those chuvas from the 1600s, from those Sephardic chuvas for the most part. So that's very amazing. Lot 73, Nachi, we cannot skip.
But before you get to Lot 73, which I want to get to Lot 73, I want to just jump back. I want to correct myself. Lot 58, which we talked about that manuscript Menhagei Ashkenaz, and then we talked about Rav Kleusner. Lot 58 is a manuscript of the Menhagei Rav Kleusner, which I should have mentioned, so I want to correct myself on that. And so there's that Menhagei, but there's some variants there. It's really, that is a major discovery. And then you get to the printed Rav Kleusner. Now, let's turn to Lot 73, a fascinating lot.
Lot 73, a pretty contemporary letter from 1993 from Chacham Ovadia. This is the letter, and it's advertised here, the letter that transformed Israeli politics. And the reason it's such, I was a little kid then, but I kind of remember the rancor and the bitterness. But earlier on in Rabbi Ovadia's political career, he was aligned with Rav Shach and the Aguda and Degel, the right-wing Haredi, Ashkenazic Haredi parties. But this is where he kind of split, was in 1990, early 90s, with the Rabin government, which was forming a left-wing coalition, which Shas was going to join. Reb Shlomo Zalman was very opposed to it, and Rav Shach was very opposed to it, and Rabbi Ovadia went ahead and, despite their objections, he did join, which really kind of created a very big split in the Haredi world between the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim. And this is a letter from Chacham Ovadia to his dear friend Reb Shlomo Zalman, in where he defends himself. It's a very, very historical, of great political interest, and the echoes, of course, reverberate down to this very day.
Lot 74 is a letter of Rabbi Baruch Ber, which is one that he says about Rabbi Leib Steinman. Rabbi Leib Steinman was 19. He said he's going to be in the future Gadol B'Yisrael. These were letters that they come up, letters of this sort, where they were trying to get them out of being conscription army, so writing letters to get them out of there, and so this was that. And then we get to Lot 76, which is a portrait of Reb Shaila of Kerestir, 1925, as they wrote the final picture of Reb Shaila of Kerestir. So many people have pictures of Shaila of Kerestir, but now you can get a portrait from Reb Shaila's lifetime, which is amazing.
Yeah, this is the OG portrait to get rid of all those mice. Right. Everybody's got they've got.
Today, Reb Shaila is much more than mice. It used to be we were growing up. Now it's much more than mice.
But this is the original one, and this is from 1925. Very great, of historical interest, like everything else in this catalog.
Yeah, so that's the catalog. Again, 76 lots, a really wonderful catalog, as always, with Genazym, catalog of the giants. This auction, once again, this auction 21 is going to be September 7th, Yudal at Elul. It'll be broadcasting live from Jerusalem, Yerushalayim at 8 p.m., at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can check it out. Go online to Genazym, www.genazym.com. You can WhatsApp them, 845-826-1645. You can email them, office@genazym.com. You can also call them, 845-501-9990. So there's many different ways you can get in touch with them. And as always, check out the catalog. Check out online. You can see many pictures of these items, these manuscripts. Really fascinating to check out. Thank you to Genazym for sponsoring once again. And thank you, Rav Moshe, for joining me once again on Auction Chatter.
Thank you, Nachi, and I wish you well and Genazym well. And of course, my very best wishes to all your wonderful listeners. All the best, everybody.